With the recent attention back on the investigation into Gabby Petito's tragic death, I've been doing some exploring of new evidence, and what has stood out to me the most is the deposition Roberta Laundrie gave in the civil proceedings against her and her husband, Christopher Laundrie. While her testimony in the deposition focuses largely on everyday details like phone records, some family logistics, how they live, and other timelines, it's the constant lying that she does, the misremembering, and the forgetting that just doesn't add up. I've said this in a previous video. I know it's not abnormal for a mother to want to protect her kid, but again, if that's what Roberta and Chris decided to do, then they need to face the consequences for aiding and abetting Brian's crimes. As a former police officer and now having done these true crime videos for 2 years now, I've seen my fair share of deceptive testimonies. People on the stand, people in depositions, they're full of lies. And that's exactly what I see in Roberta's deposition. It's exactly the same. And neither she nor Chris should get away with it. So let me break it down for you. It's deposition that I found of Roberta's. Now, Chris and Roberta were sued by the Petito family after Gabby's death, and the basis of the lawsuit was causing emotional harm and distress to the Petito family. Now, the first thing that stands out to me in the deposition is the extensive discussion of the phone records and the very unusual call times. Phone records show that Roberta contacted their attorney, Stephen Bertolino, on August 26, 2021. That's before Gabby was even formally reported missing by her parent. She received a call back from his office that same day. Now, in the deposition, when she was asked about the nature of this call, she claims she doesn't remember, which I don't believe. Now, between these calls to their attorney, there were multiple calls, day after day. Roberta and Chris Laundrie were constantly calling Brian too, having extended conversations that she says she has no recollection of now. The Laundries, according to the deposition, had previously invested with Bertolino in house flips he managed, and the Bertolinos and the Laundries also hung out socially, and they called Bertolino a family friend for over 30 years. So what I'm saying is there's obviously more than an attorney-client relationship between them. This, along with admitting to calling the attorney's office at all kinds of odd hours, some of the times were so obscure it was necessary to convert all the times to UTC just to keep them straight. To me, calling an attorney at all hours of the day, especially when the police and the media are down your throat, just tells me that you're covering your ass and you're trying to control perception as your top priority. Why else would you be calling your attorney at 10:30 at night other than to manage a narrative? At least that's the logical conclusion for me. There are also records that get introduced during the deposition that show her, Roberta, calling Brian at 1 o'clock in the morning his time. So wherever he was, Mountain or Pacific time. How many of you phone your parents at 1 in the morning unless it's an emergency? Then, as I mentioned, there's the memory lapses that Roberta says she has. When asked about various critical incidents, such as the domestic disturbance incident in Moab that occurred on August 12th, she repeatedly is like, I don't recall, or I can't remember, and wants us to believe that she never ever talked to Brian about what happened before, during, or after the police talked to him and Gabby, even though it happened just 2 days before he would fly back home. Then when Brian does fly home for a week, in the middle of his trip with Gabby, mind you, Roberta claims that she never asked about Gabby, never thought to ask Brian where she was, Brian never mentioned her, and so on and so forth. I don't buy it, because it's like you're trying to tell me your son is on a months-long road trip with his living girlfriend, who you follow on social media and have also lived with, but you didn't once ask about her well-being or whereabouts when he comes back without her? Throughout the deposition, Roberta also just sounds outright like a typical boy mom, who has the back of her son over any woman he might bring into his life, despite how poorly he treats said woman. Like at one point, Roberta insists that she believes the van that the couple travels in belongs to Brian because he quote unquote paid for it. Even though she knew firsthand that Gabby paid for the van, she saw the title in Gabby's name and knew Brian didn't even have enough money in the bank to even afford to bring himself back home after killing Gabby. Roberta said that she thought it was just a nice gesture that Brian put the van in Gabby's name. Again, I don't buy it. She knew Brian couldn't afford that van. She knew Brian couldn't even afford to pay for his own travel. Roberta also admitted to losing all of the text messages between her and Brian that existed prior to his death. So after Brian switched phones, after returning home, she explains that all the previous text messages were automatically deleted when she answered the new number. So first off, I have switched phones and seen people switch phones many times, and the old messages are never automatically deleted, especially if you have multiple devices that use that same number. Plus, how coincidental is it that Brian would need to change his phone right as he's about to be investigated for killing his girlfriend and had a need to get rid of text and phone call evidence? And I believe Roberta knew when and why Brian changed his phone the whole time. Her portrayal of Brian's relationship with Gabby is also telling. In the deposition, Roberta described the couple in only glowing positive terms. She recounted Brian as being sweet and kind, and she painted a picture of Gabby and Brian's relationship as harmonious. Which leads me to ask, how could she really sit there in the deposition and say that everything was hunky-dory when she is literally being deposed because her son murdered the person he supposedly loved? In this moment, what I see from Roberta is an extreme amount of cope. She is delusional, or she is just outright lying to manipulate the narrative. And then, as the deposition goes on, the Petito lawyers ask Roberta about the burn after reading letter, which Roberta claims she wrote before Brian and Gabby ever went on their trip out west. For his mom to try to say she wrote the letter before Brian and Gabby went on their trip, that's even worse. You mean to tell me, Brian's mom, that you unprompted told Brian that you would help him bury a body? That's not weirder than the actual truth? Nonetheless, Roberta claims she only mentioned she would help Brian bury a body because she wanted him to know how much she truly cared for him. In the sense, like, I care for you so much, I would help you do anything. Finally, the overall tone of Roberta's responses throughout the deposition are just cold and they're seemingly detached. Unless she's trying to make some of her actions seem like a joke, like the burying the body. She's completely void of emotion otherwise. When she's faced with these probing questions, she just deflects. She says she forgot what happened. But it's weird to me because I wonder, even at this point, with Brian dead and Gabby dead, why she doesn't feel any urgency or need to perform due diligence in giving the Petito family the answers they deserve. She is still protecting Brian, and that doesn't sit right with me. Taken together, these points from Roberta Laundrie's deposition leave me at a loss. All the inconsistencies, the explained deletions of communications, the evasive tone, all that leads me to the belief that the Laundrie family were involved in the cover-up, and they knew the truth about what happened to Gabby Petito long before the rest of us did. Justice for Gabby Petito means more than just remembering her story. It means holding accountable those who helped Brian Laundrie evade responsibility for what he did. Roberta and Chris Laundrie weren't just grieving parents caught in an unfortunate situation. They were active participants in shielding their son from the consequences of his actions. From the constant, suspicious phone calls, all hours of the night with both the attorney and Brian, to knowledge that of what they knew things and they refused to answer the Petito's phone calls. Everything that they did just screams complicity. In my policing days, I saw plenty of cases where people were charged for far less involvement in a crime. And parents have been held accountable for aiding their children in fleeing justice before. So why are the Laundries being treated differently? When I look at how aggressively prosecutors went after people like Ethan Crumley's parents for failing to prevent their son from shooting up a school even though they knew he had expressed intentions to, I can't help but wonder why the same standard isn't being applied here. The evidence is there. Roberta's own deposition exposes the lies, the deception, and the deliberate attempts to mislead. If justice is truly to be served, Chris and Roberta Laundrie should be facing real consequences for their role in helping Bryant escape accountability. The Petito family deserves the truth, and Gabby deserves justice. Anything less at this point is a failure of the legal system. And that concludes today's story. For more true crime cases and celebrity stories, check out the Black Rhetoric homepage here on YouTube. Till next time.